stage 3 tax cuts that are due to kick in within a couple of weeks. Today, expert economists were quite vocal about concerns they have that this cash injection into the economy at this fragile time could actually make inflation worse, and they're now calling for the cuts to be delayed. For more, let's bring in our financial guru, Ross Greenwood. Great to see you as always, Ross. Jim Chalmers says there's been a massive overreaction from people like you to inflation data released last week, but we have these tax cuts on the way. Now, small as they might be per person, you add them up and it's billions of dollars across the economy. What do you make of the concerns today from experts that this could spike inflation and could force the RBA to hike rates, not cut them, as we've all been hoping?
Well, already, Peter, you can see in Australia's economy that inflation is higher than what it was anticipated to be. And that's already led many to suggest the Reserve Bank will delay interest rate cuts until sometime next year. In fact, the interesting thing for government right now as to whether the first interest rate cut will eventually come after the time of the next election, because you got some sense that maybe the timing of that first interest rate cut might have come with when the election was going to take place. But just a few numbers for you. And that is the tax cuts themselves, the reformed stage 3 tax cuts over the forward estimates, so 4 years, were worth $105 billion. So the first part of that, let's call it $25 billion, to be pumped into Australia's economy when they get handed down. Now, Australia has around $2.2 trillion worth of mortgages. And so it's often said that the value of a 1 percentage point cut in interest rates, so from say 5% down to 4%, 6% down to 5%, the value of that is worth around, guess what, $25 billion. And so therefore the value of the first year of the stage 3 tax cuts, though they go on and on and on, is almost precisely the same, give or take, as a 1 percentage point cut in the interest rate. And that would be, I would suggest, one reason why the Reserve Bank would have good justification for stopping, not necessarily raising interest rates as some say, although that's got to be an option on the table, but most certainly waiting and seeing what the impact of these tax cuts will be on A, inflation, and B, people spending.
That's a worry, because I think a lot of people are banking on them coming down, and certainly that had been in the political projections of the government. What about the report this week? I've been running it pretty hard. The billion-dollar payment to this quantum computer company, it's based in California. Of course, it will build, it says, a computer in Brisbane, 400 new jobs. I've worked that out. That's a cost of about $2.5 million per Brisbane-based job. A whole lot of unanswered questions, Ross, today about the secret process that got this private company, only registered in Australia last year, such a massive payday. And these are not questions from journalists coming. They're from expert academics. I quoted before a professor at AI at the University of New South Wales. I mean, there are probity concerns here now, I think.
There's a few concerns, one of which is, how does the government know that this is actually the best project to invest in? I mean, there are the very best investors in this country that I've been talking to, and they say they're not quite certain. Would they actually put $1 billion worth of their investors' money into something such as this? They say, well, we're not too certain we would, because we're not too certain of the payday. I did notice also, actually just in passing today, that the Danish government, which has got massive amounts of reserves as a result of the weight loss drugs Ozempic and Wegovy. The manufacturer of those is a Danish company, and so it's now investing its own money into, guess what, quantum computing, just as the United States, the UK, every other major developed economy is in this same arms race almost to try and get the first of these quantum computers. And yet the reality is that these quantum computers are still sort of unproven technology. They are the type of thing which, if somebody does crack it, will really change the nature of where medical science and cryptology in terms of encryption of our data goes to into the future. But the reality is it is a massive punt. Now, good on the government for being there, but the reality is, have they actually picked the right horse? Because there are others, including a former Australian of the Year, who also are delving into this area, who might have also been worthy of some consideration.
Well, I think there's a massive payday, though, for all those Labor staffers now turned lobbyists involved in going back to their old bosses to get them to sign onto this deal. And I think that's going to come out in the days ahead. Let's go to the other big news today. Defence Minister Richard Marles, well, he's gone out and say said that he's on board with the potential takeover of our biggest homegrown defence company. This is the massive WA shipbuilder called Austal. The would-be buyer is a South Korean company. The government says, look, we'll not stand in the way of this proposed billion-dollar deal. Now, sure, they've got extensive US government contracts. They're likely to be involved in AUKUS, but they're still a foreign company. And as we saw with that Qenos, the plastics manufacturer collapse, it isn't who we sell Australian companies to now that's the problem. It's who they then get sold on to after that. And I've got to ask the question, I mean, what if this Korean mob was to sell Austal down the track to a Chinese company? Do we really want our military shipbuilder in the hands of Beijing?
Well, there is a decent question, and given the fact that Jim Chalmers himself last year knocked back a lithium takeover, only a small one, but a lithium takeover to a Chinese company, that again raises questions about, well, who are you going to let in and who are you not? And then it comes down to sovereign capability. Surely Australia should have some sovereign capability of its own. That seems pretty clear, because remember that, yes, it's okay to have partners, yes, it's okay to have friends, but do bear in mind that 5 and 6 years ago, there was a lot of Chinese investment in highly sensitive areas in this country. The big brave decision that was made was by Josh Frydenberg in rejecting a Chinese ownership of Australian Pipelines Authority, the old one called APA Group. Now that controlled all the gas pipelines of Australia. That was itself a very strong and very brave decision at the time that caused repercussions from China. But it is really now a situation where you've got to make certain Australia has its own sovereign capability. The one thing about this deal, I can tell you, is the Americans also have to sign off on it, and that'll be more interesting.
Wow, we hope for the Americans there. Ross, thank you for your time.